former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was convicted on all charges of murdering George Floyd, and Chauvin is now in custody. They revoked his bail pending sentencing, and he is looking at a 40-year prison sentence. It is up to the judge on what that term is. Sentencing will not take place for a couple of months, so it will be a minute before we find out how long Chauvin will be in jail. But it was an interesting moment in time in this country, because I think most people thought that Chauvin was going to be found guilty of something, just not all three across the board in 10 hours of jury deliberation, which is almost nothing. So on that note, it was a little surprising. But a lot of people immediately began talking about why the jury made this decision. And before we get into the impact that sports and life had on this trial, I just want to play you the reading of the verdict, because I think it was an incredibly important moment in the history of our country. So this is a judge in the trial of Derek Chauvin, who was on trial for murdering George Floyd. Here's the verdict as it was read live.
We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 2, third-degree murder, perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, find the defendant guilty.
Were you surprised by that, first of all?
Yeah, I was surprised by it. I felt like, kind of to what you were just alluding to, I felt like they proved a point. They were saying, hey, this is not going to take us long, and we're handing out guilty across the board. And I felt like there was definitely a feeling, like once it got close to midday yesterday, and you had kind of hit me up like, hey, are you watching this? Are you paying attention to this? It's about to happen. Once I realized that it was about to happen, and I'm like I'm watching CNN, I'm waiting for them to come back. There was this anxiety that almost set in, like, man, what happens if they acquit this guy? Like, what happens if this doesn't go, in my opinion, the right way or the just way? What happens if they don't find him guilty? And then they read off guilty on all 3 counts, and you're like, okay, we've got progress. This is good. They're sending a point. This is what should have happened. We're in a good place. So yeah, I mean, I was, I don't know if the best word to use is surprised, but like I definitely was nervous that this wasn't going to happen, which kind of speaks to where we're at with all this stuff, and it kind of is a shame on some level that anxiety even is there, but it definitely is.
Yeah, and I feel like it's justified. I was certainly not convinced that there would be a guilty verdict here, and I think it's really easy when we go into these situations to assume the worst. We've seen so many police officers get away with murder. We've seen so many police officers. I mean, obviously, one of the most egregious cases is Breonna Taylor, who 55 different ways the police in the Breonna Taylor murder, broke the law and got things wrong, and none of them will be prosecuted. Like, you just see that on a regular basis. You feel like the police in this country, especially if you're a black American, you feel like the odds are against you when you interact with law enforcement. So it was surprising to see swift, quick justice from this jury. But one of the questions I think that has to be asked is, what impact did athletes have on this verdict? And I kind of wonder about this, because the moment that George Floyd was murdered by Derek Chauvin, there was all of this civil unrest across the country. Protests, violence, burning, looting, all the worst of the worst over this one situation that really was the tipping point. Because obviously the riots around the George Floyd murder were not just about George Floyd. Yeah. It was a unleashing of emotions and anger. And you saw guys like Jaylen Brown from the Celtics on the streets of Atlanta leading protests. you saw in the WNBA where they roundly and loudly supported justice for George Floyd to the point where Kelly Loeffler, the U.S. Senator, who owned the Atlanta Dream, the WNBA franchise, came out and condemned the players in the WNBA for allowing that to happen, to the point where Loeffler was forced to sell the team by the players, and all of the players across the NBA supported Kelly Loeffler's senator, her opponent for her Senate seat in Georgia, Raphael Warnock. And Warnock won. But I guess my main question here is, when you look across the country and you see what all these athletes did, and you see the NBA wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirts, and you see the Utah Jazz kneeling as a team, do you feel like these athletes and these teams made a difference, Jake?
Yeah, I feel like they absolutely made a difference. I think that they on just a very surface level, what they did is they kept the conversation at the forefront, because what they understood is that sports is what brings everybody together. We love to, we all love to argue about sports. We love to watch a great game. We love to, bet on sports. All this different stuff that sports is at the center of. And I think that athletes understand that now more than ever. And you brought up some good examples in Jaylen Brown and all these guys, Donovan, and obviously it goes without saying LeBron and all these different players who did things. And I think the role that they filled is keeping the conversation at the forefront, keeping it in front of the nation, and keeping it on the news, and keeping it essentially keeping it in our faces every day. And I thought they did a wonderful job of that, And I think that if they hadn't done that, I don't know that what happened yesterday happens. Because think about it this way, you brought up the cops in the Breonna Taylor situation. Those cops in that situation, while everybody continues to say, say her name and let's not forget about her, at the same time, those cops are not going to be tried. They're not going to be prosecuted. And so I just look at this case and I say, hey, if we had just rioted and destroyed a bunch of stuff, rather than what actually happened, which was we took a stance, we represented it the right way, we peacefully expressed our frustrations, we would have had a different outcome. So yes, I do think that the athletes absolutely played a pivotal role in getting to this point, because without them, I don't think that this conversation would have continued nationally. I don't think that all the news networks would have continued to cover it, and I don't think certainly that it would have stayed alive on Twitter.
It is an interesting conversation. I mean, I think when you start trying to balance, these difficult conversations, because that's what these are. These are not, hey, who should win the MVP? These are not, should the Padres be playing Fernando Tatis Jr. so quickly?
Yeah.
This is life and death in this country. I mean, you look at what's going on in Columbus, Ohio, where a 16-year-old black teenage girl was shot and killed by police, and immediately people were calling for riots and talking about how this was just another George Floyd. Well, then you turn it around, the body camera footage gets released, and the 16-year-old girl that was shot 4 times by a Columbus police officer was swinging her arm. She had a knife in her hand. She was swinging her arm en route to stabbing another person. So the cop shot her. Well, all of a sudden, it doesn't look like another George Floyd situation.
Yeah.
But immediately people are upset and they assume, well, it's a white cop shooting a black American. Well, the cop's wrong.
Yep.
We're at a real tipping point in that conversation. And I don't know how you fix that. I don't think, it doesn't matter what LeBron James says about what happened in Columbus, Ohio.
Uh-huh.
That's not going to fix this. But what I do think matters is when there are protests, and I've been particularly hard on LeBron James for this, I don't want LeBron James and the Lakers riding their bicycles on the sidewalk at the back of the protest, which is essentially what they did. I think that was incredibly unimpactful. I want LeBron James to be where Jaylen Brown was, on the streets, identifying himself, saying, I'm here because I'm not going to tolerate this. I want LeBron James to stand on Santa Monica Pier and lead a march through the streets of LA and say, this is no longer good enough. That's what I want athletes to do. And I want the WNBA to wear shirts and take action. I actually think that movement in the WNBA had more impact in this country than any other movement that we saw. The entire WNBA wore shirts supporting a Senate candidate against an owner of a WNBA franchise. And there's real evidence that that movement helped unseat Kelly Loeffler in Georgia. That is significant.
It's power. And it's what this country's built on. In terms of our rights and freedom of speech and what we're able to do. I think that what they did is incredibly powerful, and I think that it goes to show that when you get a group of people together in an organized fashion, all pushing for the same thing, change happens. Things get done, and I think now we're at a point where I think that the great thing that's happened here is that I think on a national stage, I feel like the black community has really come together. I feel like they have come together. They are sharing the same message, and they are pushing for the same things. We consistently hear about, hey, this was accountability in the George Floyd case. This was accountability, but this is not where we stop. I've heard that so many times now over the last 24 hours of different people saying that, and I think it's so important because if you just stop here, this is just one case. But what happens, like in this Columbus case? What happens if that was actually a wrongful shooting? I don't think it was. Based on the body camera footage, it looks legit. But, what if that was a wrongful shooting? And what's going to happen the next time there is a wrongful shooting? Now, because of this verdict. And I think that is a conversation moving forward. If you're a cop, especially a white cop in this country, in your day-to-day, are you a little more hesitant to pull your firearm now because of this verdict? Do you now understand that, hey, if I shoot somebody, particularly a black American, whether it be male or female, a black American, and it was a wrongful shooting, am I now going to jail for 40 years? Well, yeah, I think you can say that because this happened. I think that the accountability piece is so important for the change that needs to happen.
Yeah, I would not want to be a cop right now. And frankly, I don't know. I obviously, and I've said this before, I come from a family of police officers. My uncles were cops. My brother was a cop in suburban Chicago. My uncles were cops in suburban Chicago. I would not want to be a cop. I think it is one of the most thankless, most difficult, most dangerous jobs on earth right now. And the hard part, I think, is so many cops don't want body cam footage. But I think that it's vital. It's a must. If Columbus, Ohio didn't have body cameras on, this would have spiraled out of control already. It is almost inarguable at this point to say that cop murdered that 16-year-old.
Yeah.
Did the bullets he fired kill that girl? Yes, it did. But was he unjust in shooting her? No, he wasn't.
And he also saved somebody.
Yeah, and the body cam footage clearly demonstrates that. It's situations like George Floyd, where you had a cop kneeling on his neck and you had multiple other police officers standing around watching, not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you have issues with the cops. I don't know. I think it's a very difficult job. And I guess the way to put a bow around this is to say, yeah, I do think athletes matter.
Yeah.
I think when we saw guys like LeBron James battling Donald Trump, I think there were a lot of black Americans, especially young black Americans, who made the decision to vote because of what Donald Trump was doing and what he was saying to LeBron James.
Yeah.
And I think the shut up and dribble reference from that abhorrent human being on Fox News, and I'm not going to say her name, but when she told LeBron to shut up and dribble, I think that galvanized a lot of black Americans behind LeBron James. And I think when you see LeBron opening schools and you see him funding people's futures, and you see him battling Donald Trump, and you see him, trying to support Black Lives Matter and Breonna Taylor, I think it galvanizes young black men specifically behind LeBron James. And I think that's why I say these athletes matter.
Yeah.
Now, does nobody backup point guard in the G League have a voice? Yes. Does it matter? Not on the par that LeBron James's matters.
Right. Yeah.
Influences everything. And that's why I say guys like Tiger Woods and Michael Jordan can't sit on the sidelines during these kind of things. So I actually do think their voices matter. And I hope that going forward, I hope that we have more guys on the street saying what needs to be said and doing what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Because whether you want to recognize it or not, Donovan Mitchell speaks to young black kids in the Salt Lake community. Whether you want to believe that or not. Does Donovan Mitchell have the pull that the church has? Well, certainly not. Obviously not. But does Donovan Mitchell have just as much pull as about any other singular individual in this town? Yeah, I would say he does.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think if Donovan Mitchell shows up at your school and Governor Cox shows up at your school, you're probably going to talk to Donovan Mitchell before you talk to Governor Cox.
Yeah, because Donovan Mitchell is a hero to kids, and Governor Cox is just another guy. I mean, that's just as simple as it is. I mean,
I would say that there's a lot of kids who don't know who Spencer J. Cox is.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that is there's a huge difference. The emotional side of this connection is really what matters and what drives the following. So, the emotional connection begins at, hey, you're a star in the NBA. You're doing what I want to be doing.
Yeah.
I idolize you. And so for you to walk into my 6th grade class or whatever, or to do an event or, whatever the case may be, for you to be here in front of me talking about, the change that you're trying to create and creating a better future for me, being a 6th grader or a kid or whatever, that is what galvanizes the relationship. And I think that you're so right when you said that LeBron can't be at the back of the pack. You know what I mean? In when he's in the real world at a protest, he can't be at the back of the pack. He has to be at the front of the pack.
Yes.
And I think that the other thing I would say too for LeBron specifically is when I think about all the TV production he does with the barbershop show and all of that, those are also great opportunities for him to speak on this.
What's interesting is so many people are anti-LeBron.
Mm-hmm.
Mike says, here you guys go again, quote unquote, slurping LeBron. See, that's not lost on us, that reference.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
It's not a matter of slurping LeBron. It's not a matter of, there's been no more vocal critic of LeBron's legacy than me. But you have to, when you have situations like this, you're not talking about wins and losses on the floor. I don't care how many NBA finals he's lost when we're talking about black men being oppressed by police officers in this country, being murdered by police officers in this country. LeBron James is in position to do something about that. I wish he would do more.
Yeah, we were just, this is what I don't understand. I literally just got done criticizing him. What do you mean that?
Yeah.
What do you mean that we're, I get the slurping reference and the joke in that, but in all seriousness, like, what exactly do you want us to say, or what are we saying wrong here? Because I honestly believe that LeBron James in the NBA specifically, and really I guess you could apply it to all sports, in all of the entire sports landscape, LeBron is easily one of the most influential athletes out there. So he has the power.
Well, and he goes on to say, we celebrate LeBron for sending kids to school. We celebrate this verdict like it was some great thing. It was the system doing its job. Actually, it wasn't the fucking system doing its job. And this is the problem when we get into situations like a verdict. If the system did its job, all these other police officers would have been held accountable.
Yeah.
This wasn't the system working. The system's never worked in this country. Mm-hmm. The voting system never worked in this country. If you look at what happened in this verdict, this was America rising up and saying, this is no longer good enough. Notice the BLM protests over the summer were not just dark-skinned individuals. There were white Americans and Asian Americans and black Americans Latino Americans, all skin colors, all races walking together in the streets of this country. The system doesn't work. People make Derek Chauvin be accountable. You look at Stacey Abrams in Georgia, Stacey Abrams getting voters to register properly and vote properly, and that's why Raphael Warnock defeated Kelly Loeffler.
It's heroic work, man.
Right, but the system doesn't, and this really bothered me yesterday, and this is probably too far on the show, but the system didn't do the job yesterday. Do you know why you know that? Because this was a celebration, and it felt like one-off piece of justice.
Yeah.
This should be the norm. This shouldn't be like some spectacular happening. This should have been the unmistakable, undoubtable outcome.
Yeah.
The fact that we were all on the edge of our seat trying to figure out if another cop was going to get off without serving jail time, that tells you the system doesn't work in this country. Okay, I'll stop. Brandon Whiteside said, would love LeBron to give up all his money to serve and protect his community as a police officer. I hate to say this, but who's going to be police officers? Not LeBron. Well, see, and this is the other thing I don't understand about this LeBron conversation. Everybody always says this. Well, if LeBron doesn't like how the cops are acting, why doesn't he go be a cop?
Would you? Would you give up your money? Your LeBron's damn near a billionaire at this point. Would you give up all that money?
But that's not even my point. My point is, do we really need LeBron James to go be a cop to hold cops accountable for their action? Is that really what we're doing?
I just think it's an unrealistic expectation. I think that it's not even the whole concept of that is flawed. Like LeBron going and being a cop and giving up his money does almost nothing to solve the problems that are at hand. I would even tell you that because of how much money LeBron James has at his disposal, it allows him and permits him to do more than your average person. It permits him to go to this higher level. And I think my criticism for LeBron would simply be, hey, stop making Space Jam, and why don't we get in the streets, and why don't we start making documentaries about how you're going out and trying to affect social justice and social change. And that to me is what I would love to see out of LeBron. I love Space Jam. I've watched it 50 times. The original Space Jam was one of my favorite movies as a kid, man. Like, I love that movie. But at the same time, it goes without saying that LeBron James has a responsibility as a take the basketball player out of it. He is a extremely wealthy black male in this country, and he has influence to no end. He has a responsibility to do something about it. So the idea that he would go and like be a cop and like give up all his money, that's childish. That's unrealistic. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, Brandon also says, so when someone is committing a crime, you have to worry about public reaction instead of serving and protecting? Yes. In today's world, in 2021,
yeah,
when you see a girl, so in Columbus, Ohio, this is the perfect example. I don't know how many people saw this. In Columbus, Ohio, a cop rolls up on a scene where he's been called and dispatched and told that there is a violent fight happening in a driveway. He pulls up to that driveway and he sees this girl throw another girl to the ground. That girl then gets kicked by another guy while she's on the ground. The girl who's thrown to the ground then gets kicked by another man while she's on the ground. And the girl who threw that girl to the ground is now seen with a knife in her hand on the way to stabbing another person, another girl. Like her arm is extended and she is about to swing to stab this girl. The cop, who has already drawn his gun once he saw the other girl thrown to the ground, then shoots the girl with the knife 4 times. And immediately it's, oh my God, this is George Floyd all over again. Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out it wasn't George Floyd all over again. And now the argument is, well, they should have used less than lethal force. He should have tased her. Oh, she was defending herself. Well, listen, the cop doesn't have time to take notes and interview witnesses before he defends the life of somebody who's about to be stabbed.
Yeah.
So was she defending herself? Yeah, maybe. Did she listen to the cop when he pulled up and was telling them to stop? No, she didn't. And when a cop sees somebody trying to stab another person, their job isn't to make a decision who's right and who's wrong. Their job is to defend the person without the knife. And he did that, and he did it well. And he shouldn't have to take a suspension or be off the street or worry about, like, they what they call dossed him and outed his address on the internet. Oh, it turns out he was actually doing his job and it was a righteous shoot.
Yeah, and I think that the problem that we have, this is a very legitimate conversation. I think that we have to be careful. And I texted you this yesterday. Like the communities, the people have to be extremely careful now about just like blanket statement, like just one situationing every single situation as a George Floyd happening. Like,
yes.
Like that can't happen. I mean, it is literally situation by situation, video by video. Oh, somebody was stabbing somebody else after they were specifically told to drop the weapon, not go after that person. You know, they were disobeying the commands altogether. Yeah, he's going to go ahead and save that person's life. And by the way, what would have happened if he didn't save that person's life? Then everybody would have been saying, oh, well, the cop was there. He didn't do anything about it. What good is he? You know, so that is the plight of a police officer right now.
And the issue is you cannot take the cop's word for it.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the Rodney King written report, if you look at the Chauvin case, the George Floyd case, the initial written response to that case essentially described a completely different situation.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot believe anything that you don't see with your own two eyes.
Right.
That's why body cam footage is important. Sean says, Brandon, you're not wrong, but he's doing a lot for his community. He builds a school for underprivileged kids in Cleveland. LeBron James not only built a school, he pays for them. Once you get into that school, he pays for you to go to college.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just that he's educating kids, he's sending them to college. Because and this goes back to the Utah Jazz scholarship thing last week, where so many people were pissed because it's underprivileged children.
Yeah.
That they're serving in. They're black underprivileged children. For every win, a scholarship is given. And that wasn't good enough. And LeBron is sending kids to school locally and giving them a good education, and then he sends them on to college. Being a cop, he's not going to be able to do that. That matters. That's where change happens in communities. On the street at that level, where you take kids out of difficult situations where they're not getting educations and you teach them real world skills. Like his school teaches them how to balance a bank account, teaches them how to invest, like all this money stuff that we're not getting in basic education.
Yeah.
And I think that matters. Sean also says this is on the media because they don't let the story come out and they judge right away. Police officers go out every shift not knowing if they're coming home, not saying that all of them are there for the right reasons. I'm saying that they need more credit for the job they do. I agree with that 100%. Yeah. There's no doubt about that. Art says, you guys always jump to conclusions. What do you mean, you guys? Cops are not innocent people. Most of them are white supremacists. Okay, stop.
See, that's
stop.
just too much. Yeah.
Not most of, not all. Stop painting with a broad brush. Are there cops that are white supremacists? Yes. Yes, there are. But are there cops who are genuinely out there answering a call that are good, law-abiding police officers? Yeah, there are. And that's, in my opinion, that's the majority of them. They're not. The majority of cops are not white supremacists. Yeah. Sorry. Steve says, I usually hate when you guys talk about anything but sports, but this has actually been a pretty good discussion. Well, thanks. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Now, should we talk NBA?
I mean, yeah.
We probably should.
I mean, are there enough upset people now?
I'm sure there are. It's fine. Make sure you hit subscribe. Give us a thumbs up on this video. We really appreciate your support. Again, we're trying to get to 500 subscribers as soon as we can. We're somewhere in the neighborhood of 380 right now. And once we get to 500, by the way, we will be giving away that Xbox S Series. We'll tell you about that. Once we pass 400, we'll really start talking about it a lot more. But make sure you hit subscribe and give us a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow.